Good morning. Thanks for joining me today for the third session of the College Boot Camp through the Lake Washington Schools Foundation. My name is Mary Pat O'Neill. I'm an independent college counselor and I'm a volunteer with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation and created the Find Your Fit program back in 2016. And this is the third session this week. Today is how to write a college essay. This session will be longer than the other two that we had, because there's a lot of information to cover. This is probably my least favorite session to do remotely because I can't interact with you. Boy, do I love doing these in person and calling on kids and hearing their stories and all that. And unfortunately, Zoom does not work in that format for today. So bear with me. And just like with all the other sessions that we've done, this is being recorded. It is being sent to everybody who registered. There will be handouts that are sent out. And again, with the holiday weekend, it'll be later next week. They will also be available on the Lake Washington Schools Foundation website underneath the Find Your Fit section. There's all sorts of recordings there and presentations that I've done in the past. So, on Tuesday, we talked about how to create a college list. Yesterday, we talked about how to complete your college application. And then today we're talking about how to write a college essay. And as I said yesterday, there's a number of universities that do not have essays. They're fairly easy to apply to. All the Cal State schools do not have essays. Washington State, Arizona State, University of Arizona, Montana State, Clemson. There's a lot of schools that don't have essays. So think about, do you know where you're applying? Because there's no point writing an essay unless you know that you have to do it. Do they require essays? Have you thought about what you want to write about? And a lot of students are nervous. They worry because they say they have nothing to tell a college. I guarantee that you do. And I give a lot of examples. You're going to learn a lot more about me today because I share a lot of my own stories today. Okay, so what we're going to talk about, we're going to understand the role of the college essay, why it's important. I'll be doing some brainstorming exercises. Unfortunately, as I said, I really wish I could do them in person with you and hear your ideas, but I can't. So, but think to yourself. I'll explain the different types and structures of essays, the mechanics, and there's a lot of examples that I show. The thing I always stress, and I stress this with my own students, and what I'm sharing with you today is the exact same information I share with my students, is when I do show you examples of student writing, keep in mind that these are final versions, not first drafts, because this is a process. And that's why it's good to start them early and not wait to the last minute to write them. So one of the exercises I really like to do is a values exercise, and you will receive it afterwards. And basically what it is, and this slide just shows different values that are on. It's a sheet of paper and it shows different values. And what I ask students to do is to go through and select their top 10 values today. And what I mean by that is I understand that if we were meeting next week and you were working on values, you'd probably pick 10 different ones or 8 different ones or whatever, because we're in different moods and everything like that. So there's no being locked down into a value or anything like that. And then once we have the 10, I have them narrow it down to 5, then to 3, and then to their top value. And I like to talk and ask them, how do they, how do you define that value? How, is this something that's always been important to you? Or is it something maybe more recent that as you've gotten older, you've realized the importance? How do you practice it? Is this something that you could see being valuable in college or beyond? Does that particular value connect with other values? Because typically they do. This is a list of my values, gratitude, authenticity, vulnerability, humility, love, family, helping others, spirituality, kindness, joy. I guess I sound like a Hallmark card. So I'm looking at them, and I'm not going to go into them with you, but as I share some of my own personal stories today, you might want to think back and go, oh yeah, I see that type thing. So why do I talk about character and personal qualities and values and all this stuff? So this is a scattergram, all right? And I think I showed it to you. on Tuesday, but if I didn't, this is in that great resource, college data. Great resource. Every college has a page on there. And there's an admissions tab. And then under the admissions tab, you will find a scattergram that shows, I don't know, there's 15, 16 factors that a college can use in the admissions process. And colleges indicate how, if a factor is very important, considered, and not considered in the admissions process. And everybody does things differently. And so what I like to point out to students is, and I'll tell you who these two schools are in a few minutes, but if you look at both of these schools, you can see that the essay is considered very important in admissions. Then there's this factor called character and personal qualities. And a lot of students, say, well, what is that? How do they measure that? So as we talked about yesterday, there are 5 possible things a college can ask for in the admissions process. A transcript is always required. There may be test scores. There could be an activity list. There might be letters of rec. And there could be an essay. And, I'm not saying this to dismiss anybody's academic abilities, but personally, I don't think a transcript or test scores show character and personal qualities. I work with students who have very high grades, rigor. They don't, it comes super easy for them, or maybe it's just expected of them. They don't have a choice. Their family expects them to do it. Same thing with test scores. Some kids are naturally blessed with the ability to do well on standardized tests. And I have students with lower GPAs or really struggle with their test scores. And to me, that doesn't reflect character and personal qualities. Activities can certainly shine a light on a student's character and personal qualities. But as I said yesterday, you're only given 150 characters to describe something. And so it's harder to get a sense. And also because they're reading them so quickly, it's not like they're trying to put all the pieces. Oh, this student must like helping others and stuff like that. They're not spending that kind of time. There might be letters of rec, but a lot of schools don't allow them, like UW, UCs, Cal State. There aren't any letters of rec. But even if there are, and I would certainly hope that teachers or any recommenders are talking about a student's character and personal qualities, we don't know because we don't write the letters, and technically we're not supposed to see the letters, so we don't know what they're saying. So that leaves the essay. The essay does a lot of work in the college application. And the thing that's wonderful about the essay, and I think students forget about this, is the essay is 100% in the student's control. It's strategic, and the student chooses the topic, the words, the tone, everything. And so if colleges care about character and personal qualities, I would make sure that my essay reflected my character and personal qualities. So again, we'll get into more detail about that. And just so you know, and I'm not one to go on and on about highly selective schools just because it means too many qualified students, there's not enough spots. But the school on the left is UCLA and the school on the right is Stanford. And I firmly believe and know that if character and personal qualities are important to those institutions, it likely is to others. So, okay, we already talked about that. So here's the deal with essays. So it depends on a student's list. If, we talked about having match schools where a student's likely to be admitted. Remember, those are not safety schools. Then there's maybe schools, there's reach schools, and then there's extreme reach schools. And, if you're a strong student and, you've got rigor, good grades, you're applying, you've got some green and blue schools, matches and maybes, you could write a very mediocre essay and you'd still be admitted most likely, because colleges really do focus. They focus that attention mostly on your academics. That's what they're looking at. However, as you go up the food chain, everybody who is applying to some of the maybes, the reaches, the extreme reaches, well, pretty much everybody who's applying has the same strong data points of grades, test score, rigor, etc. And so that's where the essay can have more of an impact on the admissions. So just a few things I always remind students. So colleges are big businesses. They are not charities, they are businesses. And what happens is every year, each college meets with all their, executives, presidents, whatever, boards, admissions people, and they figure out what are they looking for, because they're looking to create a freshman class. For you guys, it's going to be, the fall 24 cohort for that school. And, it could be, oh, we need more females in STEM. Oh, we need more males at our college. Oh, we spent $25 million expanding our business school. We need more business students. We need more full pay students. We need more underserved populations. We need tuba players. We need, kids who play the bongos. I don't know. But they don't share that. Okay. So the only reason I say this is sometimes when the admissions process is over, students can be frustrated. They're like, hey, my friend applied to the same school I did. My grades were better. I think my application was stronger, but they got in and I didn't. UW is a perfect example of, sometimes the randomness of admission. And I always tell kids, yeah, I know it's never transparent. It's never fair. It could be that your friend could check a box that you couldn't check. And that's why, as I stress over and over again, that's why it's important to have a balanced college list. Be authentic, be truly yourself. Another thing that I will say this numerous times this morning is to remember that you do not know who is reading your college application. It's being read by a human. The exception to that would be Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. It is an algorithm. No human being touches your application, but everybody else, it is read by a human being, and you don't know who it is. College applications are read very, very quickly. And this can be frustrating to students because if you start working on your college applications, you'll realize how many hours and hours just to complete the data section and get your letters of rec. And then you got to write these essays, and it's a lot of work. And they typically spend, 5-6 minutes. At the University of Washington, the readers have to get through 8 to 10 applications in an hour. Applications, not essays, applications, which means your essay is probably being given a minute to a minute and a half total to be read. So that's important. And again, because there's humans involved with this, reality is it's subjective. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it is subjective. Again, you don't know who's reading your application, and especially at the highly selective schools, too many qualified students, it is very much an unfair and non-transparent process. And again, this is why I keep stressing the importance of having a list of colleges that's balanced and colleges that you want to go to. Again, if you don't want to go, you would never step foot on that campus, do not go through the work of it. And I love teenagers. I've worked with them for years, but I can tell you something about teenagers is that, especially high achieving ones, they think life is linear. This may be you, I don't know, but that I do this, 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 and everything works out, and I'm guaranteed this result. And college admissions may be the first time that you find out that unfortunately life is not linear. It's more like this. And for some students, this is the first time they actually receive rejection. Don't take it personally, because it's not personal. It's just there's too many qualified applicants. So here's a list of colleges. There's a lot of them, but here's just sampling of schools that don't have essays. And again, a lot of times you can, as I said yesterday, you can submit these early, get them in and done. They might have rolling admissions, and just get them done, and then you can get them in. But what is the role of a college essay? So in my opinion, there's 3 things. So first, you want to leave a favorable, positive impression. I always say you want to leave them with a warm hug about you. And in the college application, the essay is the very last piece. It's the last thing that they're going to read. And when they're done, you just want them to go like, man, I want this person on my campus. As I said earlier, it's to show a student's character and personality. So you got to, again, you're in control. What do you want to show them? And then it's to tell a story that the student is the only person in the world who can tell it. And I know that's the one that everybody goes, what? I'm 17 years old. I haven't done anything. Yes, you have. I guarantee it. And I'm hoping that by the end of today's session that you feel better and you understand what I mean by that. It's very doable. And my students always come up with something. So you want your essay to be read, and you might be rolling your eyes and going, well, duh. But what I mean by that is, in order to be read, an essay must be readable. Remember what I said about how quickly college applications are read and processed. So if an admissions reader reads the first paragraph of an essay and can't make heads or tails of it, they'll try it one more time, but they're not going to spend a whole bunch of time. I'm somebody who I have to read college essays. It's my job. And I can tell you, they don't all start off readable. There are some where I'm like, what? And I really have to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the student is saying. They don't have the luxury of that. So again, at a more, at a green, a match school, maybe again, depending on how strong everything else is, they might say, kid can't write, but look at their academics, we're fine with it. But again, at the more selective school, and they got to get rid of qualified candidates, one of the first ones to go might be the student whose essay isn't readable. It has to be readable, and it has to be readable fast so that it makes a lot of sense. So when you write your essay, you as the student need to be the center of the universe. You can have other people in your essays, but it has to be about you because you're the person who's applying to college. So I'm going to go through what I consider, there's 4 basic storylines that happen with college essays, and I'm going to go through them and give you examples. So the first one is A student has had a challenge, and the challenge leads them to whatever it is that they want to study or a career that they're looking for. So here's a story I like to tell. I was born with a genetic eye condition. It's called nystagmus. And what it basically means is I was born without a lens in each of my eyes. And these lenses are what help you see. So when I was born, the doctors thought I was blind. I'm not, but sight is not my strongest sense. So to compensate for not having these lenses, my eyes have to move back and forth. If my eyes don't move back and forth, I can't see. So growing up, you can imagine the names I got called by kids. They called me wiggly eyes and stuff. And family and friends still tease me that when I am angry, I look like Darth Vader. Fortunately, I don't get angry very often. Anyways, and back in my day, when I was in high school, you would do driver's training at your public high school in the summer. And on the last day of driver's ed, they would turn the cafeteria into the Department of Licensing, and we'd all sit there and take the written test. And then we lined up to do the vision test where you got to stick your head up against this little box and read the chart. Well, my eyes can't move in that little black box. And I remember being very humiliated because I was the only person who failed the vision test, and I was in front of all my peers and that kind of stuff. A number of years later, I was at a doctor's appointment, and somehow my nystagmus came up in conversation. And I mentioned to the doctor that I'd always found it weird because when I look in the mirror, my eyes don't move. And so I didn't really understand why people made fun of me and all this. And he was intrigued by that and asked me to look in the mirror with him. And then he asked me if my eyes were moving, and I told him, no, they weren't. And he was fascinated because he said, they are, but my brain tells me that they're not. So I could tell that story to a college and say, and that's why I'm interested in studying neuroscience, because I want to understand the connection between the brain and the body. So I had some sort of a challenge, and it led me to what I want to study. Now in B, a student knows what they want to study, but it has nothing to do with a challenge. They know for whatever reason. So this is where I typically will say to students, if they're interested in a particular major or career, tell me 3 characteristics of somebody who would be good in that field. So I'm going to pretend I want to be a nurse. Okay. So if I were to think about 3 characteristics of somebody who would be an amazing nurse, well, 1, compassion, 2, problem solver, critical thinking, and 3, let's say good at math and science. So then what I would do is I would work backwards, and I would prove by giving an example of me being compassionate to somebody. 2, I would give an example of my critical thinking, problem solving skills. And then 3, I would share an example that showed how much I loved science and math and did well at it in school. Ergo, guess who'll be a phenomenal nurse because I possess those 3 qualities. Now in C, a student has faced a challenge. It has nothing to do with what they want to study, but they want the college to know this challenge. A number of years ago, I worked with a student, and we were talking and discovered that when she was in 9th grade, her mom was diagnosed with very serious cancer. Now her mom lived and all that, which is great. However, as a college counselor, I did not want her writing an essay about how much she loved her mom, how brave her mom was, how strong her mom was. And it's because her mom wasn't applying to college, the student was, and the student has to be the center of the universe. So we talked some more, and then she ended up writing an essay about how when she was in 9th grade, her mom would micromanage her. She would go on to Skyward and say, oh, I see you have a project due. Let's go to the store and get the supplies. Oh, I see you have a test in a few days. Let me quiz you. I see you there's a paper due. I'll edit it for you. Give it to me. And so the girl just did whatever her mom told her to do. And then when her mom got sick, her priorities changed. She didn't care about Skyward. She was fighting for her life. But this poor girl, she had no clue how to manage her time, how to study, anything like that, because her mom always told her what to do, and her grades went right down the toilet. Now, 10th grade, 11th grade, she turned it around. She was an excellent student, but she had that one semester and it impacted her cumulative GPA. And as I told you, they're going to ask you what your cumulative GPA is at the end of junior year. And she didn't want them looking at that number without understanding the story behind it. So she didn't want to be an oncologist, but she wanted to share that challenge. And then D is not about a challenge, and it's not about what a student wants to study. It's simply a story that the student wants to tell. And I'm going to share one of my favorite stories with you and think back to my values when I tell you this story. Now, before I tell my story, I'll be going into greater detail about this part, but when you're telling a story to a college, and that's all an essay is you're telling a story for the most part. I have to remember that I don't know who's reading the story. And I also have to remember that the person reading it doesn't know anything about me. So I got to make sure I set up my story. So when I start my story, you understand why I'm doing it like this. So I was raised Catholic, and in the Catholic Church, Easter is the biggest religious holiday of the year. It is the celebration of the resurrection of Jesus. There is a 50-day period prior to Easter called Lent. And during Lent, people are supposed to do things to improve and make themselves worthy of celebrating Easter. So you might hear people giving up chocolate or coffee. And quite frankly, I rarely ever did anything for Lent because I don't like giving things up, as it makes me crabby. However, 12 years ago, I decided to keep a gratitude journal for Lent. And the reason that I did was, at the time, everywhere I looked, I kept hearing stories about the research that they had done on gratitude and the neuroscience and how an attitude of gratitude would change brainwaves and do all this stuff. And it wasn't that I was negative or depressed. I've always considered myself to be a very positive person, but I was very curious about this and intrigued. And I wondered, well, I wonder if it would change me if I did this. And Lent was coming, and I thought, well, I never do anything for Lent. I'm actually going to keep a gratitude journal. So I set out to do it, and I was like, okay, there's 50 days of Lent. I will write 10 things a day in my gratitude journal, and when I'm done, I'll have 500 items. And I'm getting ready to start, and I realized a couple of things. First, I am not the type of person who can jot notes on my phone or in a notebook as a grateful thought flashes through my brain. I would lose the notebook, I would lose the phone, which meant I was going to have to write these things down at the end of the day before I went to bed. And I knew that sometimes I'm tired and crabby then, and that most likely what was going to happen is I would have the world's most repetitive gratitude journal, because every day I'd say, I'm grateful for my husband and my health and my kids and my house and my dogs and food on the table or whatever. And I didn't want to do that. I really want to try to embrace this gratitude thing. So I challenged myself to do 10 different things every single day for 50 days, no repeats. And that's what I did. And it wasn't super hard. I have a nice life. However, there were two things I had to change about myself. And the first thing was I had to increase my awareness of what I'm grateful for, because the reality is I take a lot of things for granted. The second thing is I have a lousy memory, and I had to figure out a way to remember things so at the end of the day, when I wrote them down, that I'd still remember them. And I didn't know it at the time, but now I know to call what I was doing mindfulness. So if we were here in person, here in my office, over here, there's a big window, and outside my window, there is a beautiful magnolia tree with a bird feeder hanging from it. And if I wanted to be grateful for the bird feeder, it's like I had to stop, take a deep breath, focus all my attention, turn off my brain from going in a million directions for 10 or 15 seconds, and just focus on that bird feeder and be like, oh, I'm grateful for the bird feeder. I love birds. tree's beautiful. I love nature. I always feel better in nature. And it just kind of reminds me that the universe provides. So at the end of the day, when I'm like, what am I grateful for? Pops up the picture of the bird feeder. So that's what I did. And it wasn't like anything miraculous happened. Didn't win the lottery, but it could be, oh, I had a good hair day, or, oh, my backup camera prevented me from hitting something, or my husband says, let's get Chipotle and I don't have to cook. So what goes on, it's over, I got my 500 items and I was reflecting on it. And I was very surprised because I thought, oh, I'm already so positive. But doing this activity for those 50 days really changed me. I was able to see the grace, the good, the beauty in things that I'd never noticed before. And I also felt like people like being around me better, like my energy was better and all that. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want to stop doing this because I like what it's doing. So I didn't. So as of last night, I think I'm at 38,030 or something like that. It is as much a part of me as taking out my contacts and brushing my teeth before I go to bed. People always ask, do you repeat? Yeah, sure, I repeat. But probably not as much as you might think. I'm always looking for new things. And I could tell this story to a college and say, and when I go off to college, I look forward to finding new things to be grateful for. The end. And there are colleges in today's world of hate and negativity. They're going to say, oh, would you please come? We would love to have you. And other colleges that say, we would love to have you. Yes, you're positive, but that story shows us other things about you. You're very goal-oriented. When you set your mind to something, you follow through. We like those characteristics, and we like to see what you would do on our campus. So remember, when you're telling stories, it's not just the story. There can be other things. Remember, going back to your personality and characteristics. And I realize this is a kind of a simple story. Netflix is not going to be making a series out of the Gratitude Journal of Mary Pat. However, I can say with very, very high confidence, I am the only person in the world who can tell that story. Some of you out there might have gratitude stories, and I hope you do, because gratitude is amazing, but you don't have my story. And that's what I mean by telling a story that only you can tell. It's the details, but it's not the details like the blonde woman with curly hair and blue eyes. No, it's sharing your story. So anyways, those are the 4 possible storylines. And this slide will be in the handouts that you get. Now, there are 2 basic structures to essays, and every English class you have ever had certainly went through this. The first is the narrative, cause and effect. One moment leads to the next, very straightforward. But the key is that if you're writing about yourself, you have to have change. So like in my gratitude story, the me at the beginning is different than the me at the end. If I didn't change and grow, it's not a narrative. Now, a montage is different, and this can be an effective structure for an essay. And what it does, it has a theme, and time is very condensed in it. So there's different ways to come up with stories, and I'm going to give you an example of a montage in a minute. But so if you do the values exercise, maybe you sit around with your friends or your family members and go, hey, I did this values exercise and these are some of my values. Can you think of a time when I demonstrated some of these? And your parents might give you some examples. Your best friend might tell you, things that you're like, really, that's a story? You'd be surprised at what a story is. Or you can, look in your bedroom. Do you have a note from somebody? Is there a song that brings back a memory? Do you have pictures, trophies, awards, or something? Like, think about what do those memories bring up about you? Like, what values are you showing in those stories? And that can be a great way to come up with stuff. So back to the montage here. I worked with a student years ago who wanted to study business, and he decided to do a montage, and he was kind of struggling a bit. So I sat and talked to him to help him out a little bit. So I said, okay, when was the first time you thought to yourself, I want to study business? And he knew it immediately. And that's the thing about our stories is we know them. They're typically inside of us. Sometimes we forget them. That's why it's fun to brainstorm. But anyways, this kid knew immediately. And he said, oh, I was 7. I was playing Zoo Tycoon. I'm like, oh, okay. So he wrote a paragraph about whatever Zoo Tycoon taught him about business. So what happened next? He goes, oh, I took personal finance in 10th grade. I love that class. And he talked about, accounting and interviewing, whatever else he learned. Third thing was he got his first job at the YMCA, and the business principles he learned from working there and from his boss. And his final paragraph before the conclusion was about how His favorite show was Shark Tank, and he especially loved Mark Cuban and everything that he learned from that. That's a montage. Takes it and condenses it. So both are very good structures. Okay, so I'm going to start talking about how do you write a college essay. And you're going to learn, if you don't already know, that there's lots of different college essays that students can write. Again, some students only maybe have 1 or 2 to write. Others sometimes have 30. It really depends on your college list. But what I'm going to talk about applies to all college essays, okay? So I don't know how many of you like to read. I happen to be somebody who, that's my way of relaxing is to read. I always got a book in my hand, and I love fiction. And one of the things that I notice when I read fiction is that when there's dialogue, the characters have different voices in my head. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. So what I tell students to do is to write your essay in a conversational way, as if you were talking to somebody, like you're just sitting and telling a story to somebody. Because when you do that, it allows the college to hear your voice, which again, voices do have some impact on character and personal quality, because you get a sense of somebody through how they talk. Make sure you're the center of the universe. As I said earlier, you write it in first person. And a lot of students, this is very different from what they're used to in high school writing, but you do write in first person. And if I were reading your essay, and I wish I could, I would hear your voice. Okay. And if I don't hear your voice, then I would tell you, like, wait. And sometimes students, when they'll start it off that way, but then they revert back to the formal writing of high school. And these are not papers at all. The first essay you should start with is the personal statement. It's often called the college essay. It's called the Common App essay. I just call it the personal statement. And this is where you want to start. The word count is a maximum 650 words. You can have less, but you can't go over. And 650 words is basically 1 sheet of paper. And I always say it is a generic college essay, because you're never talking about a specific college in the essay, particularly in the conclusion, which needs to tie into college. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So like when I told my gratitude story, and I said, when I go off to college, I look forward to finding new things to be grateful for. It wasn't like at UW, I want to do this. It's just in college. So I'll be showing you the 7 prompts that the Common App uses. And oftentimes students will fixate on the prompt. Oh, Mary Pat, what is the good prompt? What's the bad prompt? There's no good or bad prompt. Okay. You have your choice. Colleges don't go, oh, loser, they picked this. It's not the prompt that matters for the personal statement. It's your story. Focus about your story. Figure out your story that you want to tell. Remember, you're totally in control here. And then when you're done, you can look at the 7 prompts, and most cases, because sometimes students will ask for my help on that, it's usually 3 or 4 of them will match the story, because they are so generic, including number 7 that says something like, share a story on the topic of your choice. I mean, you can't get more generic than that. So just tell your story. And some students may need more than one, in my opinion. Again, you don't have to listen to me, but I'll get more into that in a little bit. You already saw this slide. We talked about the platforms. So Common App is most widely used. All the Washington State public universities use the Common App. UW joined last year. Prior to last year, UW would use the coalition. So prior to the class of 23, students would have to do the Common App and usually the coalition, because they're applying to UW. You don't have to do that. It's pretty rare for students to have to use the coalition now. University of California has its own platform, and then Cal State. And just a reminder, Cal State schools do not have any essays, so you don't have to worry about essays with them. Now, most students are used to writing in high school, and they're used in, to perhaps the teacher standing at the front of the class saying, all right, class, I want you to write a 4-page double-spaced paper on whatever topic they announce. And most kids go, I don't know, I'm going to fill 4 pages. Now, my son, who's now 25, he used to ask me to read his essays or papers in high school. And I have to say, it wasn't very pleasurable for me, because writing was not his strength. But this is what he would do. And whenever I explain this one-on-one with students, I often see them nod and go, yes, that is exactly what I would do. And if you do, that's great too. It doesn't matter to me about papers. But what he would do is He would take his time to get to the point, and he would have lots of adjectives, and he'd make his points. And then around the bottom of page 2, you could see he started to panic because he's like, oh my God, I have nothing else to say. I've said everything I can say, and I got 2 more pages I need to fill. So then he would like rearrange words, but he would basically repeat himself. And this is where kids go, yeah, I do that too. This doesn't work in the college essay because it will likely make it that unreadable essay that I cautioned about. Remember, we want your essay to be very readable and readable in a fast way. The other thing to be careful of is tone. This doesn't happen too often, but occasionally I see it with students' essays. So remember, we want to leave a very favorable impression. Some students brag. Again, I'm fine with talking about accomplishments, but do not brag. It's off-putting. Some kids whine. No one likes the whiner. And then some kids can't own up to responsibility, and they throw people under the bus. And again, it's just off-putting. So be careful of tone. There are 2 kinds of statements that I talk about. I use these terms a lot today, and they are a tell statement and a show statement. All right. Nothing wrong with tells. I like shows better, but you can have tells as long as you have a show. And what I mean by that, like you could say, I'm a leader. I like helping people. I'm compassionate, whatever, whatever your value list says. And I could say, I practice the art of gratitude. The problem if you just do a tell is that anybody else? Oh yeah, me too. I do that too. Yeah. I'm a leader. I'm hardworking. I do this stuff. I have a passion. But it's when you give the show, which is proof. And this is what I said yesterday about the importance of your activities and stuff that you've done. This gives you usually the show. It gives you the proof. Oh, well, when I worked on this project and I got to work with, people that I, in this population that I never worked with before, and whatever the story is, but that's your proof. And quite frankly, the show is typically the information that helps make it a story that only you can tell, because that's your show. No, you would have a different show than I do. So if you tell, make sure you show. So a lot of times when I'm editing things, I'm like, prove it to me. You're telling me, but you got to prove it. And then dialogue. Okay. So as I said, you are supposed to be writing, in my opinion, you should be writing this as if you're talking to somebody. So it's very conversational. If you were talking to somebody, you would never put words in direct dialogue, direct, quotation marks, because if you're talking to somebody, that's not what you do. You paraphrase. So my example is, one day I told my best friend about my idea. That's how you would write it in an essay. Not, I have an idea, I said to my best friend. So when you're editing, if you see any direct dialogue, again, I don't have a problem with paraphrasing, but it's very awkward, in my opinion, in a college essay. Years ago, I worked with a student. I always laugh at this one because it made me laugh. So this student literally started, her opening paragraph was, eek. And I said to her, I don't have a problem at all if you said, the first morning I woke up in my grandparents' house in India, I screamed when a lizard ran across my bed. I don't have a problem with that, but you don't start off with eek, because that's not how we tell a story. So you see dialogue, just change it to paraphrasing. So these are the 7 prompts on the Common App this is for the fall 24 admissions. And they've been the same for the last year or 2. They don't change them that often, but I'm not going to read them to you, but you can see they are fairly generic. And so don't worry about the prompt. The story is what you want to focus on. Now, before you start writing your personal statement, don't let anybody tell you what your essay should be about. So like I said, I may have some opinions later on, but keep in mind, you don't have to listen to me. They're just my opinions. At the beginning, don't worry about word count or prompts or punctuation or anything. Just tell your story. You can always edit things down. I don't think any topic is off limits. It all depends on how it's presented. I would say, though, be careful with political opinions and things like that, just because you don't know who's reading your essay. It doesn't mean you couldn't put in current events about things, but just be careful, because you don't want to be polarizing to people. As I said earlier, you do not know who's reading your essay, and that's very important to keep in mind. But the other thing is what I said earlier too. You don't know, or the person who's reading your essay knows nothing about you. And students will argue. They're like, what are you talking about? They got my application. So first of all, remember how fast they are reading things. Some colleges separate the essay from the rest of the application, and they have two different people reading it. So the person who is reading your essay may not have access to the rest of your application. But even if they're reading the same thing, no offense to any of you, but no one should think that their transcript, test scores, activities, letters of rec, whatever, are memorable. They are reading them super fast. They're not retaining the information. What they're doing is they're scoring all those different components of your application. You're getting a score. So, don't think that they're going to remember that you took AP Bio as a junior. If that's important to your story, make sure you include that fact. So don't leave stuff out. Otherwise, it's a story that doesn't make any sense, and then that could hurt your admission chances. So when I read students' essays, typically, the body's probably okay. I mean, you usually need some work, but there's two main areas that almost always, especially in the first draft, needs some work. And it's the first paragraph and the concluding paragraph. And the first paragraph is very important because it is setting up the story to somebody who knows nothing about you. So you got to set up the who, what, where, when, and how, basically. It would be similar to a newspaper article where the opening paragraph is called the lead. And this is something that a lot of students, they're like, what are you talking about? My teacher says I have to have a hook. No, you don't. Okay. Now, if a hook happens naturally, great, use it. But again, I'm going to be showing you some examples. And in a lot of the cases, there's no hook. All right. If you set up the story properly, they want to read the next paragraph because they're interested in what happens in the story. But that's not a hook. I have this happen a lot in the fall of senior year with my clients who, we've worked on their personal statement. By the time school starts, it's all done. And then all of a sudden, when they get back to high school to senior English, they'll say, oh, I made some revisions. And I'm not making this up. Some of the weirdest things, like these are stories that are all done. I've had frogs show up. I've had matrix references. And I'm like, and I always go, what happened? What's this? Oh, I needed a hook. And I'm like, you ruined your essay. It's stupid. Get those things out because you do not need a hook. So, and the other thing is the conclusion. Students will just stop a story. You have to have a conclusion, and it's important that it ties into college or beyond. And it's very easy to do, but it needs to be done. And I'll explain why. So you are applying to college. The essay is part of the requirements of the application. You are hoping that your application gets you accepted into college. So if you're telling them a story, something about that story has to tie into college, or why are you even telling it? So you'll see some examples in a little bit, but just remember that you need to do that. Okay, so I'm going to read to you a couple of examples of opening paragraphs and concluding paragraphs. Obviously, there's a body in between, and these are from personal statements, so the 650 word. Going into high school, I had some knowledge of computer science. My father and I worked on personal devices with a Raspberry Pi, a device that teaches computer programming skills using Python. I enjoyed these projects and knew I wanted to get involved in computer science in high school. While I joined my school's Computer Science Honor Society, I didn't enjoy it because the club meetings felt like lectures, while I prefer hands-on projects where members collaborate to find a solution. I noticed in the meetings that the most advanced coders complained about the content being too easy, and newer members felt intimidated. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything like that at our school. Great opening paragraph, explain the whole situation. And here's the conclusion. Hack Club taught me a lot about computer science. It turned me from a consumer of technology to a creator. I also discovered the importance of not giving up on things I believe in. I look forward to continuing to develop my computer science and leadership skills in college. Another thing I want to point out about this particular example. So some, I always say, tell your story, show them what you know, blah, 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 blah. But you have to make sure that what you tell them is understandable to the general public. I'll use myself as an example. I am not the world's most technological advanced person. I can use the basic stuff. I understand things. I can understand things students write, but and this is, I'm being a little silly here, but I said to the student, because again, most admissions people, you could be applying to computer science, but they're not, UW computer science professors aren't reading your essays. It's admissions people. All right. So here where it says, my father and I worked on personal projects with a Raspberry Pi, I made sure that they added in a device that teaches computer programming skills using Python. And I'm being silly, but, jokingly, someone like me could be like, oh, I love Raspberry Pi, and he forgot the E, type thing at the end. I want a piece of that pie. All right, here's one, and here's a very different one. My older sister is on the autism spectrum, which made my childhood different from other kids' childhoods. I helped and stood up for her a lot, especially when we attended the same elementary school. Witnessing children being mean to others hits me harder because of what I watched my sister go through. In college, I'm excited to join clubs to spread awareness for those with disabilities and to strive for inclusivity in my new environment. I'm extremely passionate about being inclusive, and I would love to bring that quality on campus to better others' lives. So again, very different personal statements, but both very effective. Now, when you're writing your personal statement and perhaps in other essays that you're writing, I think a very important ingredient to add is vulnerability. And I acknowledge the fact that if you're a teenager listening to this, you're like, what? No teens really like the idea about being vulnerable and sharing vulnerability. And let me explain. So all vulnerability means is admitting that you're not perfect. Hate to break it to you, but you're not. And I'm not either. Nobody is. Human beings, we're flawed. And it takes bravery to be vulnerable. And I don't mean ooey gooey details. Heavens, no, I do not want ooey gooey details. But I've worked with a lot of students over the years, and I've worked with a lot of high achieving students who are applying to highly selective schools. And high achieving students tend to be the ones who are the least willing to show imperfection, because they just know, I have to be perfect, I have to be perfect, I have to be perfect. I said, no one is. And my students who have been brave enough to show some vulnerability, and I'll give you some examples, are the ones who tend to be admitted to the highly selective schools. And it's because your essay is being read by people, humans, and humans, we react and respond positively to the humanness, like in people. Now, if you have a senior English class and your teacher asks you to do peer reviews or to stand in front of the class and read aloud, oh my gosh, I would not, when I was your age, I would not have shared anything vulnerable about myself. I would have written about my dogs or something, something and you can do that too. Just get the grade you need. But for the actual college essay, please, I encourage you to be vulnerable. And I hope I give you some examples throughout today that you understand what I mean, and you're courageous enough to do it. And again, I don't mean ooey gooey details. We still need to leave a very favorable impression, but I'll give you some examples. So when I shared the story about my nystagmus, my eye condition, and I said, the kids made fun of me, that is vulnerability. Or when I said I was the only one in my group, in front of I failed the eye test for driver's ed in front of all my peers, and that was embarrassing. I could say my mom was an alcoholic growing up, and I don't need to explain the details of what that means. People go, oh, we know what that means. Or even going back to this past, witnessing, I helped to stood up for a lot. Witnessing children being mean to others hits me harder because of what I watched my sister go through. That's vulnerability. Okay, not ooey gooey details, but it hits us in the heart. Our humanity responds to each other. So I do encourage you to have some vulnerability. I'm often asked, can I only write about what happened in high school or in the last year? You can talk about things that happened when you were younger, 5, middle school, elementary school, I don't care. But you want to bring it forward to today. And remember, you only have 650 words, and it's strategic. And colleges do care most about the student applying today, not the student when they were 5 years old. So I was talking to a student just yesterday in my office, and we were brainstorming, and I always ask kids, oh, do you have any thought? And she goes, oh yeah, I've been thinking about this essay for, I know what I want to write about. And it's a good story. However, the story takes place when she was in 5th and 6th grade. And I said, well, that's fine, but you got to pull the story forward to today. And like, how did that experience, how has it made you who you are today? Or another student, I was reading her essay, and she spent the first 2 paragraphs of her essay talking about how she selected stickers, in the process of selecting stickers when she was young from the pediatrician's office. And I understood what she was saying. However, that's 2 paragraphs, and you're limited. There's a word count. And then the very most important part of the story, she condensed it into 3 sentences. And I was like, okay, we gotta flip that, because yes, you can talk about it, but you can tighten that up. So yes, you can have other things when you're younger, but make sure it brings it forward and that the majority of it is on current time. So now I'm going to explain, how do you write about challenges in college essays? And you don't have to, no one has to, unless a college has a specific question that says, tell us about a challenge you've overcome. But challenges can be a really good source of college essays, especially if you can look behind you and say, look what I've overcome, look what I've done. I do caution students, if you are currently going through something serious, maybe mental health, eating disorder, depression, suicidal thought, if you're still in the midst of it, I would probably not write about it in a college essay. And it's because you're still wrapped in it, and your essay is being read by humans, and as a human, they might be concerned that going out to college could make it worse or whatever. So, but if you can look behind you and be like, yeah, look what I've overcome, certainly feel free to write about it. So here's the formula. It's very straightforward. First, you identify the challenge. The second step is to talk about the effect. And these need to be negative, all right? They can't be positive things that happen, because if it's positive, it's not a challenge, it's an opportunity. So you got to talk about the negative things. And through the negative things, this may be the things that allow you to show vulnerability, because they're negative, and sometimes students want to spend a lot of time, like, let me tell you everything that happened, and focus so much on that. And while it's a critical part, it's not the most important part for a college in a challenge, and which are steps 3 and 4. Step 3 is, okay, all that bad stuff happened to you. What did you do because of those things? And then the 4th step is, and how did you change? How did you grow? So personally, if I was looking at a values exercise, I would probably spend most of my time in steps 3 and 4 if I was writing an essay, because that's the magic. Because what you're showing a college is your potential. This is who you are as a human being. So I'm going to share, again, if we were in person, I'd ask somebody to tell me a challenge that they had overcome, and I'd walk them through the process, but I can't do that with you. So I'm going to share a challenge that I had when I was about your age. And quite frankly, I would probably never tell this story to a college in an essay, but it works for the challenges formula. So growing up, I was a very late bloomer. I was very awkward and shy and introverted, had the wiggly eyes, remember? And I actually changed schools a lot. So kindergarten through 2nd grade, I went to public school. 3rd grade to 8th grade, I was at private Catholic school. And when that was ending, most of my friends were going on to private Catholic high schools, but my parents couldn't afford that. So I had to go back to the public school, where I didn't know anybody because I'd been in private school for so long. Then 9th grade, I was in what they called junior high back then. 10th grade, I moved on to the big public high school. And by the end of 10th grade, I was like, okay, I'm starting to make friends. I know how to ride the bus. I know where my locker is. I was involved in some activities. Things were okay. And that summer, right before junior year, my parents came home one day and said, oh, we have bought a new house, and it's only 6 blocks away, but unfortunately it's in a new school district, and you're going to have to change schools. And I fell apart. I'm like, well, I don't want to do this. So our neighbor across the street said, hey, why doesn't Mary Pat use our home address and then she can stay at her high school? And we all thought that was a great idea. So when junior year started, they gave you the forms at the start of the school year. I wrote out 18645 instead of 18635, and there were no computers back in my day. And the school never picked up on it. I never brought it to their attention because, well, they'd say liar and then or prove it, and I couldn't do either one of those. And everything's fine. And then senior year, I still remember the day. It was the Tuesday of Thanksgiving week. I suddenly got called down to the counselor's office, and I'd never been called down to any office. So, again, it was a very large school, and I was a very shy, under the radar type of student. And what had happened was, when you move, the post office will forward your mail for a year. After a year, they return it and say, hey, this person doesn't live there anymore. And the reason why this was a big deal at our school is I grew up in Detroit, and we were the suburb right outside of the city of Detroit. And the public schools in the city of Detroit were not very desirable. They're pretty ghetto. Nobody wanted to go there. So they always had issues with kids from Detroit trying to attend the suburban schools. And so they decided to make an example out of my situation. And it went all the way up to the school board. And in January, the school board decided that, yes, I could stay and graduate with my class as long as my parents were willing to pay $2,000 in tuition. Now, my parents did not have $2,000 to pay for college, let alone 6 months of high school. So that was not an option. So in January of my senior year, I had to start at a brand new high school where I knew nobody, and I was very scared. And the first day, I remember just being so petrified. And the thing I was most nervous about was lunch, because it was a closed campus. I couldn't go anywhere. And the period right before lunch, a girl came up to me and said, hey, I know you're new. Would you like to sit with my friends and I? And I was like, yes, please, thank you. And while she and I never became good friends, I did become very good friends with her friends. And so, I survived, I graduated and stuff. But that experience taught me several things. The first was, well, don't lie on forms, tell the truth. The second thing was, that was the first time I realized that my parents couldn't fix all my problems. And that was actually a pretty big growing up moment for me. The third thing that I learned was the importance of community for me. I hated that I had changed schools so many times, K through 12. And I vowed that wherever I was going to college, I was graduating from, that there's not going to be any transferring, I was going to stay put. And then the fourth thing that I learned from that experience, that student who invited me to lunch, that made a very big impression on me. And the rest of my life, I've always tried to model her and be the person who sees somebody new or sitting by themselves and asking them if they'd like to join me and stuff like that. So again, would I tell that story to a college? No, probably not. But just remember, challenges can make for very good college essays. So there are additional essays in addition to the personal statement that colleges can have, and these are called supplemental essays. Now, some colleges are known for having the same supplemental essay forever, and then others can change them periodically. So I do always caution students, make sure you know that the supplemental essay you're working on has been confirmed for the class of 24. Nothing's worse in writing essays than finding out that you wrote an essay that that isn't going to be used because they've changed the prompt. And if you remember when I showed you on the Common App, on the information page for a college, it shows in there it shows the writing requirements. Or you could always go to a school's website and check there. If you can't see anything there, reach out to admissions and say, hey, I'm a rising senior, I want to get going on my applications. Do you have your fall 24 supplemental essays? So don't hesitate to ask. So supplemental essays are sometimes noted as required, which means you must write them, and sometimes they're designated as optional. And it's important to read them if they're optional, just to make sure, to see if you have to write them or not. So some very common optional ones, and you'll probably laugh when I say these, but these are very common. Are you a convicted felon? If yes, please explain. Are you a registered sex offender? If yes, please explain. Have you ever failed a class? If yes, please explain. Assuming you can't answer those, or you might have failed a class, and again, you should explain that. But other than that, you can skip those. But sometimes they'll say things like, optional essay, in 200 words or less, tell us about your favorite extracurricular activity and why it's important to you. And if it's a school you actually want to be admitted to and attend, I would encourage you to write it. Now, here's an example. This is Northwestern University, a very highly selective school. And they have what's called a Why Northwestern statement. And we'll talk more about how to respond to why us essays. And it says, in 300 words or less, help us understand how you might engage specific resources, opportunities, and or communities here. We're curious about what, and that's in italics, what these specifics are, as well as how they may enrich your time at Northwestern and beyond. Do you plan to complete it? And then you have to, this is on the Common App, you say yes or no. We strongly encourage a response. So again, if you really want to be considered for Northwestern, but you choose not to answer this, again, in a highly selective environment where there's too many qualified applicants, if I was a college, I'd be like, well, I'm gonna, next group, okay, first we got the unreadable essays, and now we're gonna go to the ones who didn't even bother to respond. So make sure you read it and make a determination. So here are some tips for writing supplemental essays. So these are specific to a college versus the personal statement that I said was generic. And so in the personal statement, it's just talking about college or life beyond college, whatever. But in a supplemental essay, you can say the name of the college because that college is asking. Now, we're going to talk about repurposing essays later on. Just make sure you change the name depending on who you're responding to. The word count is often shorter, not always, but it's often shorter. And sometimes students have the misconception that, oh, shorter means easier. It's actually harder, in my opinion, and it's because you have to tell a complete story in whatever that word count is that they give you. Sometimes, especially at more selective schools, the supplemental essays might be weighed heavier in the admissions process because they're harder to write and they're very specific to a college. You must answer the prompt. So whereas before with the personal statement, I was like, don't worry about the prompt, focus on your story, then look at the 7 prompts and pick one. This is different. There is one prompt and you have to answer it. And that's often feedback that I give students, especially as it gets closer to deadlines. Everybody's overworked. I'm like, oh my God, I got to write all these essays. Everybody's so tired. I get it. But make sure you have somebody, a friend, a parent, whatever, to be reading your responses to make sure you're actually answering the prompt, because it's easy. Kids will do like a quick cut and paste and whatever. Oh, I'll just reuse this. But if their response doesn't answer the prompt, again, that's the next one to go. You didn't answer the prompt, so we're going to get rid of you. However, don't waste words repeating your prompt. Just get into the story. And the college should discover something new about you in each essay. So let's assume there's a personal statement and maybe 2 supplemental essays. And we'll use me as an example. Okay, so my personal statement's about my gratitude journal. And there's 2 more essays. I should not mention that gratitude journal at all anymore. I've mentioned it once. Maybe now I talk about my volunteer work with the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, or maybe I talk about my love of dogs and the community that has formed for me, or something like that. Let them learn about different sides of you and don't put them off. Now, today is June 30th. I'm not talking about having them done today because, as I said, most of them are not out yet for fall 24. They will start coming out in July, usually by August 1st when the Common App goes live. That is, they're usually there. But don't be like, oh, I'm going to wait till school starts, or I'm going to wait till November. No, they're hard and they're important. And as I said, repurpose. Typically what I see is, most students will have 3 or 4 stories and they will reuse them depending on the supplemental prompt and stuff like that. Again, be careful because you are specific to a college that you change the names of the school. And these are some examples of supplemental essays. The ones on the left are the more traditional, 200 words, 100 words, whatever. And then the ones on the right are short responses. And most colleges don't do short responses, but some do. USC does, I think Chapel Hill does, University of Maryland, Stanford. I'm sure there's more that I'm just not thinking of, but everything that we talked about works the same for short responses. The biggest thing is maximizing the word or character count. So let's say a college has a 300-word supplemental essay, and you write a phenomenal response in 260 words. Awesome. I wouldn't be telling you to write 40 more. I'd be like, good, whatever you got. You know, is it complete? Yeah, then you're done. Versus in a short response, if let's say they give you 100 characters, let's say the question might be something like, tell us your favorite food. And you're like, oh, thank God, this one's easy. Tacos, 5 characters. But remember what I said, you can't just tell, you have to show. So you need to, because actually they don't want to know what your favorite food is. They're trying to learn more about you. So you have to explain, you know, oh, my grandmother made them every Sunday and they represent love to me, or, you know, something like that, whatever the story is. So maximize your character count on the shorter responses. And just keep in mind that with short responses, you do not need to write in complete sentences. You can just do bullet points or, you know, whatever, just. Okay, so many of you may be applying to the University of California system. There is one application. You can apply to as many of the 9 campuses as you want. You just pay a $70 fee for each box that you check. They do not know, like if you apply to UCLA, San Diego, Santa Barbara, UCLA only knows that you've applied there. They don't know where else you've applied, but you do pay $70 for each application. They do not have a personal statement. They do not have supplemental essays. They have what are called personal insight questions, PIQs, and there's a lot of information on the UC website. They are absolutely looking for stories. They're looking, you know, for students to, you know, prove why they deserve to be there, learn about their backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. There are 8 prompts, which are listed here. Again, they're fairly generic. And a student has to pick 4, and you write 350 words, up to 350 words for each one. Now, many of the students that I work with, they typically will use their 650 word personal statement. It just has to be edited down, but just know that a lot of kids do that, or they'll use other supplemental essays and apply them. So again, that's the repurposing that goes on. Now, the University of Washington. So I mentioned that UW started using the Common App last year, which is great. And I showed you the 7 prompts that the Common App uses for its personal statement. UW does not use those prompts. UW, so on the Common App, remember I showed you where it says these colleges will not look at your personal statement on the Common App. And actually UW is listed in there because they will not look at it. But in their UW specific part of the Common App, they have their own personal statement, and it is right here, and it's 650 words, and it says, tell a story from your life, describing an experience that either demonstrates your character or helped to shape it. And again, it's a good generic prompt. And if I were to guess, I don't know, 85-90% of students that I work with, they can use their Common App personal statement to fit that prompt, because it is fairly generic, but just to make sure that your story fits that prompt. And if not, you may need a different one. Now, then there is a short response, and it says, describe the world you come from and how you as a product of it might add to the diversity of the University of Washington. And you have 300 words. Somebody asked yesterday about the Supreme Court's ruling about admissions, and as I said, I'm not a very political person. I don't get involved in all that stuff. But I just do want to clarify things. So in the state of Washington, at the public universities, for at least 25, I think it's been about 25 years, there was a state law passed where colleges cannot see, the public schools could not see any information about race and stuff like that. And so UW, Washington State, whatever, they haven't seen it. But if it's something that's important, and I love diversity, I think diversity is important in all different elements. Obviously through essays, if you want to share something about your culture, your background, your university, that wouldn't be a bad place to do it, because they will read it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I have a stack of newspapers to read this after this morning. I haven't had really a chance to sit down because I've been so busy with the boot camp and my own clients. But so anyways, so there's that short response. And a lot of times kids think, this is my chance to talk about my culture, you know, whatever that means. I just want to caution you. So whenever you see the words community or diversity in a prompt, and a lot of colleges have these, Oregon does, University of Michigan has it. I know there's more because I've been looking at them with students. What they want to know is, are you inclusive? That's what they're trying to prove. And there's lots of different ways to prove it. And there's lots of ways to show inclusivity. Yes, it can be race and culture. I've seen it with gender. I've seen it with sexuality. I've seen it with hair texture. I've seen it with food. I've seen, like, there's lots of ways of proving inclusivity. And the storylines can vary, but again, there tends to be a theme. So one of them could be, I was not inclusive. And again, I always think those are brave ones to do because, because you're showing vulnerability, like, hey, look at me, I was not very inclusive. And then something happened to me and then I changed and now I'm inclusive. Then there can be I'm inclusive, but people have not been inclusive to me and it bothered me and led me to this or whatever. Or I'm inclusive and people have always included me, but I've watched them not be inclusive to this group and it bothers me and I took that action. So just know, I actually find the community essays to be beautiful when they're done well. And I'm going to read to you 2 examples. They're very different ones. I could pull out lots of different ones to read about, but a lot of times the diversity essay is a chance for students to show vulnerability. And when I read these to you, again, if we were meeting in person, I'd be saying, okay, point out something that you see that demonstrates vulnerability. And since I can't do that, I've highlighted it so you can see. All right. I'm an American dream child. My parents were born in Mexico. They moved to Seattle for my dad's medical school residency. This is not what most people think of when they hear of Mexicans moving to the United States. Just so you know, the yellow is what I consider vulnerable statements. Growing up, only Spanish was spoken in our house because my parents believed it would benefit me and my brother. When I started kindergarten, I didn't know any English. I cried the first day and didn't want to return. Eventually, I learned to speak English. It was hard being one of the few Mexicans at school. Other kids called me Beaner and told me to go back across the border. In high school, there were different cliques, including a Mexican one. This group was looked down on by other students. They were stereotyped as living in trailer parks, not speaking English, and supposedly doing drugs. I worried that I would be associated with these things. I started hating my culture and hoped no one knew I was Mexican. I worked hard to prove I was smart, hardworking, and social. Outside of school, we were friends with other Mexican families. We talked about how it felt to be Mexican at a mostly white school. The older girls encouraged me to be proud of my culture and that I speak another language. I started telling people at my school my stories of visiting Mexico and what it was like having a Mexican family. Instead of ignoring me, my classmates were intrigued and wanted to learn more. I've learned not to believe in stereotypes. My diversity is unique and has shaped me. At the University of Washington, I will help educate others about different cultures and show other people to embrace their culture as well. Being different is only a good thing. Again, look at the conclusion, how it's tied specifically to the University of Washington and answering that prompt. So excellent example of the community essay. Here's another one. Growing up, phrases like kill yourself and go off yourself were common. I wasn't aware of mental health issues and said these things because I thought they were funny. In 6th grade, a friend tried to explain to me that he wasn't doing well mentally. I thought he was joking and brushed him off. For 3 years in middle school, I worked with a personal trainer that I looked up to as a role model. When he committed suicide in 2019, 3 days after I'd seen him, I was shocked. I hadn't thought about anyone's mental health, including my own. It bothered me because I hadn't noticed anything wrong. I felt guilty and blamed myself for not recognizing anything or at least trying to help him. I still feel that way. This really opened my eyes about mental health issues. It made me realize that I have no idea what anyone is going through and no one knows what I may be experiencing. I'm now more empathetic to someone with mental health issues because while I may not know how they feel, I do know the feeling of losing someone because of mental health issues. I've learned to recognize signs of depression. More than once, I've reached out to friends to make sure they were okay and that they knew they weren't alone. At first, it was hard for me to start these conversations because I didn't know how they would respond. It's much easier now. They're used to my asking and seem thankful that I check up on them. At the University of Washington, I look forward to taking classes on psychology and will continue to spread mental health awareness by participating in your peer health educators program. And I was very proud of the student. That opening paragraph where he admits, like, man, I made these insensitive comments, ignored a friend who tried to tell me something. That's bravery, that's vulnerability. And again, but he changed, and that's why we can show that part of us. Some of you may be applying to colleges that ask in a supplemental essay, why do you want to go here? And I'm here to tell you, these are challenging. These are not easy essays to do. So really make sure you really want to go there. Or, so anyways, it's a balance. Again, here's my arms are always flopping around in these essay sessions. So on one hand, you need to explain why you want to go to that specific college. And one of the things that I notice many students do, and part of it is that they put them off, and these are right before the deadlines, and again, life is happening, senior year is happening, you're burnt out and all this stuff like that. But they're way too generic. Oh, you have a beautiful campus, you have a strong engineering program, you have study abroad, you have, whatever. It's like, okay, you can say that about a lot of schools. You have to be very specific about what it is, that program. But what students forget to do is to balance it out. And that is proving why the university should want you. You got to bring those two pieces together. And when it's done right, it's quite effective. So you do need to do some research, and, what do you want generally from a college? And this should stay the same for every college. And then what specific stuff does this college offer? And how will I engage? And again, that stuff should stay the same too, because, you don't change. But every college that has this question, they're different. So you can't treat them all the same. And I'm not going to read all of this to you, but I'll read some of it. So this was a student who was applying to the University of Michigan to its nursing program. And University of Michigan has a 500 or 550 word essay. I can't remember. It says, why are you applying to Michigan, and why specifically this program? And the first draft the student turned in was very generic, very boring. And I said, you didn't put any work into this, I can tell. And I gave her some homework to do. And then she came back, and this is what she ended up with. And it was very, very good, because, this is what Michigan offers. This is what I offer. So I'll just read some of it. It says, I dream of traveling the world and experiencing life outside of what I know. I will minor in global health. Michigan offers 7 study abroad programs specifically for nursing students. As a woman in STEM, I want to attend a college that empowers me. My AP chemistry teacher encouraged me to join HOSA and Science National Honor Society, 2 male-dominant clubs. I competed for our HOSA chapter and discovered that I love the science community. Since then, I have encouraged young women in my school to join these clubs alongside me. I look to continue my active involvement of supporting women in STEM. And then she talks about specific clubs. She talks about, the personalized teaching approach and how that will benefit her, and the person that she talked to, she did such an excellent job. And when these are done right, they can be successful. But if you phone it in, so as I said, make sure you really want to go someplace, because these are not easy to write by any means. So I mentioned earlier that some students may need more than one personal statement. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So as I said, we talked about college majors and stuff like that. So some colleges will do direct admit to freshmen. And you might find it out on a school's website. But you might have to reach out and find out on your own how they do it. And if they do direct admit, again, you need to find out how selective is it, because at some schools, oh, you want to be a biology major? Welcome, you're in biology, or computer science or whatever. Like, yeah, great, you're there. Others, they might say, well, just say, how difficult is it to be admitted? And if they say, oh, it has a 7% acceptance rate, well, then it's not open to, whereas other places it might be, oh, as long as a student has taken these classes in high school and has grades above this, we let everybody in. Again, everybody does things differently. So the first question that I have students ask themselves is, do you know your major? And if you say yes, does the college offer direct admit for freshmen? And again, if the answer is yes, there should probably be, is it selective to get in? That would probably be the next question I ask. But is there a supplemental essay about choosing a major? And if the answer is no, and it's a selective major, personally, I would likely recommend that a student use their personal statement to prove why they deserve a spot. You know, and UW is a perfect example. And the only ones I would do this for would be computer science and engineering. I wouldn't do it for Foster because it doesn't seem to make any difference what you write about. Foster has its own random way of being admitted. And the reason is, again, it's so selective. The computer science programs at like, I don't know, 25% acceptance rate. Engineering is a little bit higher at 50%, but it's selective. And so UW has two essays, tell us about an experience that shaped your life, and then the community essay. And I've just seen the results that my students who do use their personal statement to prove why they deserve get in at a higher rate than those who don't do it. Again, it's totally up to you. But then I mentioned the University of Michigan. If you're applying to Michigan or Madison or schools like that, USC, they have specific supplemental essays that say, why are you choosing this major? Tell us what you want to get out of it, blah, 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 blah. Well, then you can't use your personal statement there. You need to have a different personal statement, or else you're telling them the same information. Remember, you want to tell them different information. So think about it. That's all I'm saying. And I always say to students, tell your story. If you are proving why you deserve a spot, and this is an example, just one paragraph. Students probably graduated by now, but I just thought this was he did such a great job. This was part of his personal statement. 2 years ago, I studied for hours for a prestigious high school computer science competition. I solved almost every problem I found from previous contests and consulted college-level textbooks to learn new algorithms and techniques. I felt prepared when the online competition began in December. After 4 qualification rounds between December and March, I earned one of 26 national finalists out of thousands of students. It was fulfilling to see my hard work and passion transform into actual results. That was him telling his story. That wasn't a story that somebody else could tell. So again, it's always in the details of the story. Now, there is additional information that you can put, that you can write essays about. And I will explain them. So one is the impact of COVID, and you have 250 words. Again, if something tangible impacted you from COVID, and especially in an academic standpoint, like you didn't do well, you had mental health issues, or half your family was sick, maybe someone died, it impacted you, your grades, and maybe you retook some classes or something like that. But yeah, you can talk about it. They give you 250 words. For the explanations, I tend not to maximize those. Again, the poorer admissions people, they got so much to read. So and it's not an excuse, just tell your story. And then there's this other information part. Again, they give you up to 650 words. I would say most students have nothing to say, but you might. I was talking to a student the other day who, for the class of 24, your remote year was 9th grade. And what I have noticed in working with students is the class that most students had the most trouble with remotely was math. It did not do, most students didn't do well with their online math. And so this student happened to take Algebra 2, 9th grade. And then when they started 10th grade, they were doing honors pre-calculus, and they weren't prepared because they did not have that foundation in Algebra 2, and the grades reflected it. And at the end of the first semester, the student had a C-. So they switched out of honors, went to regular, got a tutor, blah, blah, blah. Everything turned around great, but the student needed to explain that one thing. Another thing that you can put in other information, you don't need to, but this is something I encourage my students to do. If students attend any of the choice high schools in Lake Washington, it could be Tesla, ICS, Cambridge, I just always flag it, because again, we don't know who's reading the college application, and sometimes people might think, well, everybody knows my high school. Yeah, you don't know who's reading it. They might not. So it could be something like, I attend a choice lottery-based STEM high school in my school district. The curriculum is very rigorous. Students have very little choice in course selection. That's all you gotta say. And then if and what that can do is, if if maybe your GPA isn't as strong as you would like it to be, but because of the rigor of the classes you're taking, they go, oh, wow, that kid's got a 3.5, but that's such a rigorous school. That's really cool. Or if you've done really well at the rigorous school, they go, wow, that kid's even smarter than we thought because they're taking rigor. So I just think it's a good idea to flag it. As I said, your goal is to tell a story, that you are the only person in the world who can tell it. And so there's some cliche essays, and I don't say these to make anybody feel bad, but I do have to tell you, there are some essays I start reading and I think, oh, please don't make me read this because I've read it so many times, because they're cliches, and there's a list here, and it could be I do sports. I got injured. It was very hard, but I got better and then I came back. Or oh, I had a really hard class in high school. I had to get my nerve up to talk to the teacher and ask for extra help. I got a tutor and oh, then I did better. Or I went on a mission trip and I learned no matter the color of our skin, we're all people. Or I haven't been reading as many of these, but I was reading these for a bit. Prior to COVID, I was a mean girl, and then I had to be alone with myself, and now I'm not a mean girl anymore. And again, I'm not saying the stories aren't important, but remember to tell them in a way that you are the only person in the world who can tell them. Because if I sit there and go, oh, please don't make me read it, those poor admissions people who are reading much more essays than I do are thinking the same thing. So some last minute do's and don'ts. Pay attention to word count, grammar, and punctuation. Be careful of dialogue. Remember, just paraphrase. There should be nothing in direct quotations. And flowery writing. Be yourself. If you're funny, creative, serious, whatever. And, a lot of you, I'm sure you're super bright and intelligent, probably much smarter than I am. I'm not asking anybody to dumb down their vocabulary. I just want you to write like you speak, as you would in a normal vocabulary, to speak like a 17, 18-year-old. So 17, 18-year-olds, even 61-year-olds, we rarely say things like, I had a plethora of ideas, or it was a harrowing situation. So just write like you speak. Don't worry about the hook in your opening paragraph. If it happens naturally, great, but I showed you lots of examples and there were no hooks there. Get rid of unnecessary descriptions. Again, when we speak, we don't use a lot of adjectives when we speak, so you shouldn't have too many in your essay. Only tell the parts of the story that are important. Be careful of complex sentences. When I'm reviewing an essay in a document, if I see a sentence that's more than 3 lines long, I start being suspicious that it is a complex sentence. And all I do is shorten it up into 2 or 3 sentences. But the reason why you don't want complex sentences is, first, is we don't speak in complex sentences. And the other thing is, a complex sentence by its very nature is harder to read because it's complex. And remember what I said at the very beginning about keeping these readable. They're reading them so fast, and the more complex you make it, the harder it is for them to get through it. Make sure you're making I statements, not you statements. And when you think you're done, read it aloud, or have your computer read it to you, or ask your best friend to read it to you. But you'll be amazed what your hearing catches that your eyes missed. So senior English, I love teachers, respect teachers. But when it comes to college essays, I often have a difference of opinion, and it's because, generally speaking, high school English teachers in senior year, usually they work on them, they have not had training in how to write college essays, and so they tend to treat them like papers, AP Lang papers, or creative writing, and they're not. They're neither of those things. The other thing is, I mentioned about vulnerability. As I said, if your senior English class is, having you stand up and read or do peer reviews, I wouldn't share anything personal. But quite frankly, this is me, I would not share my actual college essay with anybody in my high school who's applying to college, because it's competitive. And there is nothing to stop somebody from copying and stealing somebody else's essay. So I would never share my my real essay with anybody at my high school. I would write about my dogs or something silly and get the good grade that I need. As I said, please avoid creative writing. First of all, creative writing is fiction, and this is not meant to be fiction. But the other thing is, it just doesn't. I love creative writing. It's a beautiful form of writing, but it's not always as readable because you have to take so much time. And I had a student, very bright student, very beautiful writer, and we would get into arguments all the time, and they would say to me, I don't understand what you mean by creative writing. And my response was always, would you say this sentence? And she'd say, no, I'd never said that. And I said, then that's creative writing. That doesn't belong in your college essay. So I'm going to do, I think this is my last official reading of the day. Get some more water here. And I'm going to read to you a college essay. The prompt is from the University of California, one of their personal insight questions, and the student picked the give an example of your leadership. Remember, they give you 350 words. And the yellow highlight are things that I consider more creative writing. The green would be comments that I would make, like, these are things that should be changed or go deeper or whatever. And a lot of students, when I read this first draft, they go, that's a great story. And it is a good story. I like the bones of the story, but the second version is better. It's much more readable, and it's more of a story that only the student can tell. So here I go for my dramatic reading of the day. I opened my jewelry box and found a slug. Adrenaline spiking, I shrieked at the unexpected sight. It seeped over my smooth silver rings, and heart pounding, I slammed the lid shut. That's how my sister envisioned the prank. In reality, I knew it was fake. I took one look at the dog hair covered slug-shaped piece of rubber and laughed. I could have left it on my dresser. I could have rolled my eyes. Instead, I hid it under her pillow. Struck with spontaneity, my commitment to our slug game began. It's an unspoken rule that defies time, arguments, and maturity. You look for the slug, but once he's found, you silently hide him somewhere new. My sister squishes the slug into my shoe. I perch him on her ceiling fan. I hide my smile when the slug falls out of my chemistry notebook. She carries him in her pocket for days without noticing. Every time I find the slug in my plant, volleyball bag, ski gloves, wherever his creative new home is, I'm proud. Although our rooms have always been a few physical feet apart, we weren't always as close. Nothing connected us, a teenager and a kid. Nothing until our slug hiding efforts. When we were younger, I hated how my sister copied all my ideas. Now I'm glad I can be a role model she wants to follow. By contributing to silly traditions, she knows I'm there for the serious stuff too. We tell each other everything. I lead her away from challenges I faced and support her through overcoming her own. I owe our friendship and trust to a prank and a fake slug. He showed me simple actions leave a trail of positive influence. When I begin college, though, our rooms will be more than a few feet away. I could throw the cheap slug away when packing up my room. I could forget about it. It won't change my dedication to my first leadership role, big sister. But life's also much less monotonous when slugs make you smile. So of course, I'll hide him under her pillow. Again, good story. I like the story. A lot of it is creative writing. And again, if you're reading this super fast, and let me tell you, at the University of California, they've got so many applications. Last year, UCLA had 150,000 applications for 6,000 spots. So they're reading them quickly, and it slows you down. And then some of the green, like first of all, the student is making you statements. And I said, don't make you statements, make I statements. And then again, I'm there for the serious stuff too. We tell each other everything, and again, that's a good start, but it's too surface level. You got to go deeper and tell a story that only you can tell, and perhaps be vulnerable. So I'm going to read the final version. And the student actually changed the prompt to, what would you say is your greatest talent or skill? My favorite skill is hiding a fake slug. That's not really a skill, but it represents more to me. A few years ago, my little sister's simple prank failed. She put a fake slug in my jewelry box, hoping to scare me. I took one look at the dog hair covered slug-shaped piece of rubber and laughed. I could have left it on my dresser or rolled my eyes, but I hid it under her pillow instead, and our slug game began. Every time it's found, hiding in a shoe, volleyball bag, or ski gloves, we silently hide him somewhere new. We rarely speak about it, but it's become the tradition I'm most proud of. Although our bedrooms are only a few feet apart, my sister and I weren't always close. Nothing connected us, a teenager and a kid. We made fun of each other. We never told each other things. But not long after our slug hiding began, she came to me for the first time. Hearing how she was scared to make friends in middle school, we suddenly felt like a team. Making fun of her wasn't an option anymore, and I wanted to help her navigate the same issues I'd faced. We're both part of the LGBTQ community, which our parents don't accept. Our silly tradition of hiding the slug has brought us closer, allowing me to support her through serious challenges. When we were little, I hated when she copied me. Now I feel lucky to be someone she wants to follow. While I know that hiding a slug isn't a great skill, being a good older sister is. It also encourages me to be a role model she deserves. I know my sister and I will remain close while I'm in college at the University of California. I look forward to helping others confront fears and overcome challenges. So just yes, same basic story, but much, much better. And you get a sense of the student's voice, and they went deeper and they were vulnerable. So great job. So I'm not going to speak about this again. I just want to remind you about these scattergrams, which you can find easily. But remember about character and personal qualities. What are you showing to a college? Because you control it. Now, you need to organize yourself with your college essays, again, and with all the things, deadlines and what have you. But what I would do once all the prompts are out, like I said, usually by early August, they're all out, is I would organize them and say, oh, look, I have 5 YS essays. Oh, 4 of my schools want to know about how I'm going to add to the diversity of a campus. 2 want to know about my leadership role, whatever. Have it all organized so that you can figure out what stories you're going to tell and how you're going to do it. So here's some final checklists to go through. Ask yourself, does the first paragraph set up your story? Because remember, the person reading it knows nothing about you. Does your conclusion tie to college or beyond? Are you showing? Are you proving? Is it in your voice? Are you showing any vulnerability? Again, it doesn't have to be ooey gooey details, but a little vulnerability really makes it better. What values are you showing colleges? And is this a story that only you can tell? And again, it's usually by going deeper and deeper and deeper. That's how you do that. So here's some tips for editing essays. As I said, read it aloud. You may find out that you use the same word 7 times in one paragraph. So read it aloud. Don't worry about a hook. Check for spelling and grammar. Grammarly is a good free resource. Are you within the word count? If you go over, it cuts you off at whatever the highest word count is. So don't do that, because your conclusion won't be there. And I think there's usually a minimum. I think I want to say for a 650 word essay, I want to say it's 250. I can't remember, but they will tell you the minimum. Are you showing, or are you just telling? Maybe you go through and highlight, okay, I'm telling them this, I'm telling them this, I'm telling them this. Oh, I'm not proving anything to them. Make sure you're telling that you're showing that you're proving things. Are you oversharing? Again, please do not overshare. Don't know ooey gooey details. Check for adjectives and the use of very. The number of times, again, when we speak, we don't use that many adjectives. So go through and highlight every adjective and go, oh man, I can get rid of 100 words that way. Do not say in my freshman, sophomore, junior year of high school. You can just say freshman year. They know you're in high school because you're applying to college, or 9th grade or whatever. Again, be efficient with your words. In your supplemental essays, did you answer the prompt? Check for dialogue. Make sure you're paraphrasing. And does your essay make sense? Is it readable? And again, this is where sometimes having somebody close to you read it. And I always say, pay attention to tense. Keep it in present tense. That's what I tend to do, or keep it simple. Like he wrote, he writes, he will write. Sometimes I had the opportunity to go on a hike, and you can just say I hiked. Okay, you don't need all the fancy stuff. Again, it's word count. It's not. That's what I'm always focusing on. Okay, so I'm going to see if maybe we can get some interaction going here. Possibly can, possibly can't. But when I work with students, after going through this whole conversation, I like to ask them, tell me something that you want a college to know about you. What do you want to make sure that a college knows about you? And if anybody would like to share something, I can do a few of them, and I just want to go through an exercise. So if you would. Yeah, no one will see your answer. I'm the only one. I don't have good eyesight, so don't worry. I won't say your name or anything like that. But if anybody would like to share something that you want a college to know about you, do it now, either in the chat or the Q&A. It's more fun if people participate. There we go. Someone did. Let's see. No, that's not. Okay, so someone said they're hardworking. Great. Okay. Anybody else want to share something? Okay. I enjoy music and playing music. Awesome. Great. Thank you guys. It's so much more fun than me coming up with things. I had an eating disorder that I overcame and now I love cooking. Oh, that's interesting. Sharing your vulnerability. That's cool. Good for you. I like to figure things out on my own. Okay, you guys are doing great. Okay, so that's enough that I can work with. Okay, so as I said at the very beginning, what can possibly make up a college application? The transcript's always going to be there. You might have test scores. You might have an activity list. You might have letters of rec, and then you could have the essay. So, okay, let's use hardworking. Okay, so yes, your transcript, let's say you have a really strong transcript and maybe you're great with, you have good test scores if the school accepts them. You might have an amazing activity list or something like that. And maybe there's a letter of rec where the teacher says, oh my gosh, so-and-so is so hardworking. But hardworking is a tell statement. And again, they really are reading those applications fast, and it's a rubric. They're scoring. They're scoring your transcript. They're scoring your test scores. They're scoring even your activities and stuff. And it's just like, let's say, because they're reading them so fast, they're not sitting there going, oh, look at all these activities. This must be a very hardworking student, blah, blah, blah. So, and obviously hardworking is a tell. You'd have to back it up with the proof. But if you want a college to know that and to understand, again, because I'll tell you, some kids have good grades and are just involved with things because their parents make them do it. And, doesn't mean that they're hardworking. So if you want them to understand that, to me, the essay is your place, that you would make sure that a college knew that. If you enjoy music and playing music, again, it's probably on your activity list. You've probably taken music classes in high school. You might have a music teacher writing you a letter of recommendation. But I know for a lot of students, music is very powerful. It means a lot of things. And if it's changed things in your life or led you places or helps you cope with difficult situations, again, the essay is how you're going to make sure that the college knows that. The student with the eating disorder, well, that's not on a transcript. It's not a test score. It's not an activity. Although your love of cooking could be on there if you do a lot of cooking, or you have a little blog or something like that. It's possible that a teacher might know about your eating disorder because maybe you had to leave school for a bit, and again, I don't know, but we don't see letters of rec, so we don't know. So yeah, if you wanted a college to understand, this challenge that you had an eating disorder and how you're able to move past it and become healthy, and how now you love, wow, that is an essay. And then what's the other one? Oh, I like figuring things out on my own. Okay, well, that is not a transcript. That is not a test score. That's not an activity. I mean, I don't know, I guess it's possible that a teacher could say, wow, I've noticed that this student always likes to figure things out on their own, but I think the odds of that happening are somewhat slim. But what a great thing to let a college know. But you'd have to give examples and share you'd have to prove your story. And the reason I do this little exercise is I just want you to understand the sacredness of the essay, which is kind of weird, but to me it is. It is sacred because, as I said at the very beginning, you control every word, the impression, the tone, everything is under your control. And you don't want to waste your essay on something where they'd go, yeah, we knew that already because it's on your transcript, or, or yeah, we see that, yeah, you like baseball, or I don't know, like, again, you're trying to show them a lot more. So that's why I just say, really think about what it is that you want a college to know about you, and then that can help you to figure out what you want to write about. Well, no, we did pretty good. I went all this way without having a technical difficulty. So as I said, think about what you want a college to know about you. And again, depending on your college list, you might have a lot of things you need colleges to know about you if you have, more than one or two essays you have to write, which again, some students do. Always know, if you ever have questions for me, I'm easily found at findyourfit@lwsf.org. If you send it to there, it automatically comes to me. I'm always happy to answer questions. We I will typically do what I call office hours or have sessions where people can, reach out like on Zoom and ask me any questions. The last couple of years in the fall, we've done essay review sessions where you get a one-on-one with me for like 10 minutes. You'd be surprised how much we can get done in 10 minutes one-on-one. So if that's something that you would like, make sure you follow Find Your Fit, because you'll see those opportunities. So now I'd just like to open it up. If anybody has questions, you can ask questions about any of the information over the week that we've talked about, or specific to essays. So if you have any questions. So somebody did have a question earlier. Let me see. Somebody said, I was in Cambridge and then moved to Running Start. How to highlight it in my story? Well, most likely there's a story there, because if you something made you decide to leave, and I would again just tell your story, be honest, be upfront. I worked with a student a couple years ago. He went to Interlake in Bellevue, and Interlake is known for being super rigorous. It's got both full IB and AP classes, and very, I can remember one year I was one of the students I worked with who went there. There were like 43 kids there, were national merit finalists, that's a lot for one high school to have 43 of them. Anyways, and he was there, and his COVID year, remote year, was sophomore year. And he said it was the biggest joke he'd ever seen. And a lot of his friends, he goes, it was so easy. He goes, I didn't have to do any work. I got straight A, and his friends were, but he hated that. It upset him. And his friends were all like, what are you talking about, man? This is so easy. But he didn't know what was going to happen. And so he chose to go to Running Start for junior year and senior year. And he really pushed himself. He was a science kid, and it gave him more opportunities. And again, he wanted to control that. He knew he was going to be challenged. And so he explained that story. That was a story that he told. I don't think it was his personal statement, but it was an explanation, because he didn't want a college wondering why he went from this rigorous school to Running Start. Again, and there's nothing wrong with Running Start, but just keep in mind, like at UW, they do pay attention to the classes that you take. So that might be, so going from Cambridge to Running Start might be a personal story, personal statement that you use, but it also could just be an explanation. And again, the student just explained why, and he got into a lot of colleges, including UW. So let's see, any other questions? Okay, I really want to go to UPenn, but I'm not sure my GPA is competitive enough. I go to STEM. Yeah, well, so first of all, UPenn is an extreme reach school. So just keep that in mind. And no problem having one, but make sure you have other colleges on your list that you would be successful at too, because it's an extreme reach. It's got such a low acceptance rate. So as I said, if I recommend that my students who attend the choice schools here, in that, is there any additional information we should know? I just have, the Tesla kids, I just say, I attend a lottery-based choice STEM high school, public high school in my school district. The curriculum is very rigorous, and students have very little choice in course selection. That's all you have to say. Again, depending on the school, they do get a high school report, if they read it, that talks about how rigorous STEM is. But you can control it by making sure that you note that in your additional comments. And, and again, make sure you've got good letters of rec, and you got strong essays and things like that. So any other questions that I can answer? If I know I want to study something in STEM, but don't know exactly what should I avoid schools like UW because STEM programs like engineering are locked behind directive it? So that's a good question. I guess I guess I would ask you, have you explored directly engineering or computer science, like done things that are specific that would give you a better sense, or job shadowed people who work in that field, or do informational interviews with people, or talk to students who are currently in those programs to see what you like, see if it's a good fit for you. And then if you find out that one of them is a good fit, you could certainly apply. And when you get into a major, like if you did get into computer science at UW or engineering or nursing, or whatever it is, a direct admit program, you're not locked in. You can change your mind. I often share the story of my son, who had no clue what he wanted to study in college, and he graduated in the class of 2016. And he was super good at math and science. So his dad and I were both like, well, you should be an engineer. And he's like, okay, I'll be an engineer. So he got into a college and into their engineering program. And then like within 2 weeks, he called me and he said, it's not that I can't do it, I just don't want to do it. And I did find out later what it was is they had a guest speaker come in and to the engineering program, and somebody asked, one of the students said, what's your greatest accomplishment in life? And the guy had designed a screw that's used on some Boeing 737 or something like that. And my son was like, check please, this is not for me. And then he had to stay in engineering for that year, because otherwise he would have lost some credits. So he stuck it out for a year, and then he switched, and he's very successful in a different field now. But so that's why I always say, and STEM is so broad, and you can, let's say you love biology, but you're like, oh, computer science, maybe, bioinformatics, computational biology. I mean, there's all sorts of different things. So should you avoid UW? Well, UW, I will say, they don't like, this is what they've told us, they prefer students don't apply undeclared. They do prefer that students put down a major, and they give you two major choices, your first choice, second choice, and if you put down computers, and if you do computer science or engineering, that has to be your first choice, and you can't list the other one as a second choice. They won't consider it, and actually they never consider second choice major, so I don't even know why they do that. But you could say like, oh, like biology or chemistry or something like STEM is broad, and you don't have to have it figured out, you guys. If you're like, well, I really like my science classes, well, then again, go broad. My daughter was a biology major in college, and again, biology is so broad, and in a lot of cases in the sciences, you do have to continue on for school and get a graduate degree, and so when she was taking biology courses, because you're taking all sorts of different ones, she took classes in immunology and epidemiology, and she was fascinated by that. And then through internships and stuff that she had, that's what led her into public health. And then she got her master's in public health and became a epidemiologist and has worked on vaccines and all that kind of stuff. So again, please don't put that pressure on yourself. I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but a lot of colleges are fine with students being undeclared. The question to always ask, if you are undecided, undeclared, again, you guys are so young, no one should put that pressure on you, that you have to have your life figured out. Just ask a school, if I'm undecided, how do you support me? What will you do? And if it feels like, wow, that sounds like good support, then that's great. 50 to 70% of college freshmen change their minds. So just know it's not a big deal. So maybe you pick something, and then, if you change your mind, you change your mind. Industrial design. Okay, so they're just asking how you can explore other areas. So this is where talking to people who work in the field can be really helpful. And don't be afraid to reach out to adults who work in fields that you're interested in, even if you don't know them. Most adults, if you're polite they are happy to share what they know, because again, it's that human part of us. And like, I have strangers reach out to me, I'd like to learn about being a college counselor. Sure, I'll share some time with you. You could look on LinkedIn, you could look, I'm sure there's probably an industrial design association or something like that, like, and then if you can find some people, or if have your parents go, oh, my child is interested in industrial design, does anybody know anybody, and you might find somebody locally, but you can look on LinkedIn too. Get a polite little email, try to find, like 20 of them or something like that. Just say, hi, I'm a student in Seattle. I'm really interested in industrial design, but I'd like to learn more. I was wondering, can I bother you for a 15-minute Teams call, Zoom call, whatever? And most people are going to be like, yeah. And again, do it on their terms when it's convenient for them, blah, 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 blah. But there's some questions you can ask them. One is, how did you decide this was the field for you? Tell me your story. How did you get here? What do you love about what you do? What don't you love about what you do? What's your education? What did you get your undergraduate degree in? Did you go to graduate school? Knowing everything you know now, would you take that same path? What advice would you have for someone like me? And, and I don't know a lot about industrial design. I'm kind of more of a generalist, but I don't know if it's something where you apply directly in as freshmen, or if it's something that later on, I don't know, do you have to have a portfolio as a high school student? Like, find out things like that. See who offers them. Again, if there's a certain school that you're interested in, you can reach out to the head of the program and say, hey, I'm a high school student and I'm really interested, but I've got questions. I was wondering, could I talk to somebody in your program to learn more? And you can ask them those questions. You don't have to do anything anybody says, but you'll gather information. And quite frankly, sometimes those conversations that you have of talking to people or talking to you, like, if that can be very powerful to use that in a college essay, especially if it's a YS essay. You can talk about who you talk to. So I hope that helps you. Okay. What schools can you double major at? Well, I don't know if there's a list. You can pretty much double major, I would think, at most schools. Now, how easy it is and how long it will take you to do that, again, this is part of your research. I'm not a computer, you guys. I can't push a button and go, these are all the schools. But this is how a double major works. So it depends on what your double major plan is. So within a school, a university, a college, whatever term I'm using here, there are individual schools. Like, there could be the School of Arts and Sciences, the College of Engineering, community, School of Science. I don't know. I my brain is going to that because I've been talking for almost 2 hours here. But anyways, there's individual schools, and let's say School of Business. That's another one. Okay. So let's say in the School of Business, you're like, I want to be an accounting and a finance major, double major. Okay. That probably isn't going to be that hard to do, because both of those majors are within the same umbrella at the school. And so they're going to have the same prerequisites, and you could probably easily do that and graduate within 4 years with a double major. And sometimes this is where, if a student does running start, this can be beneficial to be able to do a double major and graduate either within 4 years or 3, because you're coming in with all these college credits. Because that's the thing, is there's these college credits. Now let's pretend, instead of the double major being under the same umbrella, you say, I would like to double major in film and computer science. Those are in 2 different umbrellas. There's two different umbrellas. One could be College of Engineering, the other one could be the College of Arts and Sciences. And most likely, it's going to take a lot more work, because the prerequisites in each of those and the classes you have to take are very different. They don't overlap at all. So that could take a student 5 or 6 years to graduate with a double major. Sometimes what makes more sense for a student, instead of double majoring, is having a major and a minor. like UW, you can minor in business. Personally, I always think minoring in business can be a great supplement with other things, because a lot of companies like to know that students understand how businesses work. So just know it could be a major and a minor, it could be two double majors. Again, and that should be part of your research. And when you're talking to universities, again, remember I said demonstrated interest, reach out to the school and say, hey, I'm curious. Can you tell me? But again, do some of your own research too, but it totally depends on the school. Let's see, is that it? Is that it? Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. So thank you all for participating. As I've said numerous times, this is being recorded. Everyone who registered will receive this along with handouts, but it'll probably be more toward the end of next week. Thanks for supporting the Lake Washington Schools Foundation, and hope to see you again at another Find Your Fit